Hello and welcome to Clouded Dreams. This is my channel. I'm Sarah and today I'm going to talk about watercolors and the materials you'll need to get started. Obviously you don't need everything that I'm going to talk about today, but if you are overwhelmed going into an art supply store, craft store, looking for materials, or you're just getting back into it, or you have a student at home that you want to let explore in watercolor, this should get you pretty set up in introducing that medium to them. As if you go into a craft store or an art supply store, you're going to run into two different forms of watercolor. One of them will be in the tube, which is wet and creamy consistency. You'll open them up and put them on a little palette, like a plate. So tube paint is really great if you are doing very large washes of color, like a whole sky, and you want it to be the same color. Then you can go ahead and mix it up and add water to it and have a large amount of water. Or it's really good if you want a very strong accent color added in to your painting, like a pop of color. Then this is really convenient for that. The other option that you'll see are called pans of paint, and they come in half and whole sizes. A half size is about 2 milliliters, and they look like this. This one's my favorite right now. It's not clean. This is a half size. Whole sizes are elongated. These are convenient because you can take them out and refill them or buy refills. You can actually put the tube paint into one of the containers as a refill and let it dry, and you'll have your dried cake. These are really convenient if you are traveling with your art supplies, because you can fold it up and put it into a backpack and they're all together. They're great if you are painting outside. If you're doing small paintings, you don't need to mix up a whole lot of color of something. That's what these are convenient for. But they come in even smaller sizes. Both of these are watercolor sets. So you can find something that meets your needs. If you really want to just travel with watercolor, you're painting outside, then a small portable version is probably best for you. If you are really going to paint a very large watercolor paper, then actually setting up with the tube paint is probably going to be a better option for you. I also wanted to mention that they come in, this one is a tropical set, so they have very vibrant colors. It's fun to pair with my normal watercolors. If I want like bright flamingos, or I want flowers that have just a lot more vibrance to them, then I'll open this one up also. And if I want something that has shimmer, these have mica powder in them. They're watercolors. I use them for touches of water that I want to have shimmer, or if I am doing something like the flamingos with the flowers or something, then maybe I'll add a little bit of my shimmer paint to them. But these are really fun for kids, especially because they like the shiny quality to them. So you might mix and match to figure out what you're painting and then pick the paints to fit that. Watercolor paint comes in two different grades. One grade is artist quality and one grade is student quality. Student quality or academic quality is going to have fillers and binders in them that the professional paint does not. So the professional paint is going to be a more pure pigment, a more vibrant color. It won't be as chalky or shiny. And that's one of the problems that you'll run into with a kit like this, is that it's going to give you it'll give you shiny where you might not want it, and they're not going to be vibrant the way that a professional watercolor pigment is. But if you're just starting out, then the academic version, these are all academic paints, they're going to get you through just fine. You can, these are all tube versions of different professional watercolors. Anyway, they're all different brands of watercolor paint that are professional quality. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was brushes, and because it's very daunting whenever you're going into the aisle of brushes. There's just so many. To begin with, they come in, watercolor brushes typically come in two different types. They have natural fur or hair. These are sable, and I have a camel one. I just wanted to, they're really soft. And then the other version is like a synthetic fiber, so but you want them, whenever you drag your finger across them, you want them to snap back into shape. You'll want a couple things. You'll want a flat brush for putting your washes down. These are flat brushes. You can do just one, and I would do a 1 inch, or this is really a 3/4 of an inch. I like this size, but I work smaller, so a smaller flat brush to put large amounts of color down works better for me. You might find that you need, if you're going to work really big, a really big flat brush to add a lot of color. If you're just starting out and you have kids that you're doing it as a hobby or whatever, you might start with a basic flat brush to add large amounts of color. The other, your main brush though will be your round brush, and they come in, they start with 000 and they go up to like 20. I got them all out of order, but do you see how they go up in size? They just stair step. They stair step up. These are all the same brand. They just stair step up from small to large. The smallest is in the zeros or a number over 0. They're going to be really tiny. This is a 0, and this is 18 over 0. So I would suggest getting a 4 and an 8, or a 6 and a 10. So you're going to get a small, like if you do 6 and 10, it's large size, small size, 2 brushes. Or go with 8 and a 4, like this. 4 is probably my favorite size, so that's what I go with. But it depends on what size you actually are painting with. That different brands have different, they might say that they're a 10. These are all 10s, but they're different brands, and some come to a point, some do not. So whenever you're looking at them, look for ones that go to a point, because you're going to put detail in with these. To recap, a flat brush, probably an inch or 3/4 of an inch, 2 round brushes, a 4 and an 8, or a 6 and a 10, something in that general area, but a small one and a large one. And then the fourth one that I would suggest, if you're just starting with 4 brushes, is something small like a 0, or maybe even slightly smaller than that, to put in fine detail and take out mistakes, because you can dip it into water, brush over an area and then blot it out and take away that whatever you don't like there. Whenever they're not in use, I typically put them in a cup on my desk. I have a lot here because of this demonstration. I usually only have like 6 or 8 on my desk. I don't have this many brushes. I use maybe 4 to 6 brushes, and sometimes even 2. You'll see if you watch some of my other videos that I don't switch out my brushes a whole lot. And a couple more things before I leave brushes in general. If you leave them in water too long, the paint brushes will fray out. This is from having them in water too long. So once you're done with them, wash them with cold water and lay them flat or in a cup like this, because they start out like this, and if you abuse them, especially the inexpensive brushes, this is an inexpensive set of brushes that I thought were pretty, so I got, if you leave them in water too long, they will fray out and not be as convenient to paint with. This would be rough to paint with, but it would make really neat texture lines. Another problem when leaving them in water too long is that the paint on the outside starts to chip away because it gets waterlogged and it breaks the paint. You can see how, yeah. So, and the glue that holds these metal ferrules on will start to loosen, and you'll completely lose your bristles off of this. If don't wash them with hot water, because once again the glue that holds this in will start to soften, and you'll start losing your little synthetic fibers out of these. So wash the paint out, lay them flat to dry. I typically put them in a cup whenever I'm not using them. You don't need a whole bunch out at one time, just a handful, small, large for a flat brush for laying down a large amount of sky or grass or a large amount of color. If you're really just starting into it and it's really overwhelming, get a little variety set so you can explore which brushes you like, and then maybe if you keep going, get a fancier one in a brand that won't give you as many issues, because some of these less expensive brushes have a tendency to fray out if you're not super gentle with them. And you can wash watercolor out with just water. You don't have to use soap. If you are going to use soap, use something really gentle. I like this brush cleaner. I find that it takes the stains out of my brushes, and I like it, but I'm not wonderful at caring for my supplies. I'm pretty hard on paint brushes and materials in general. So if you're just starting out, go for 4 brushes, a round or 2 rounds, something small to take for fine detail or taking out corrections, and a flat brush for laying down color. You should be fine with that. If you want to pare it down even further, go with a brown brush that's a medium, something that has a point that you can still lay down color with, and something that you can do detail with just a tip. So maybe like a 6 if you just wanted one paintbrush. Paper comes in a range of weight and texture, and it's not the weight that's going to affect your painting as much as the texture on the surface. So I wanted to briefly go over paper choices, because when you walk down the paper aisle, there's a pretty large scope of paper. You're going to want something suited for water mediums or watercolor, something that's thicker. So the weight is measured in pounds per ream, so it'll say LB, and or grams per square meter, GSM. That'll be your grams per square meter. I look at pounds, but normal watercolor will start at like 90, it'll go like 90, 140, 200, and really thick will be 300. I'm going to show you these. You're really going to, your general work will be 140. If you can stick within the 140 for just starting out, or you should be just fine. If you want to do something really detailed and you're worried about the warping of the paper, then go up heavier. 300, you shouldn't have to tape at all to prevent it from warping. Watercolor paper comes in 3 different types. It comes in hot press, which has a really smooth surface and it's great for fine detail. Cold press is for, it has a slight texture to it and it's general purpose. Most watercolor paper you find in the craft stores or art stores are going to be cold press, and rough paper, which is, I don't have any to show you because I don't work on that, but it's for real loose brush strokes, wet on wet, or textural effects, or it just has a really thick texture to it, and it can be tricky to work with. It's not really suited for fine detail, as that texture will like break up the lines that you're trying to draw onto it or paint onto it. It's rippled across the top. And so hot press is going to be really smooth paper. This is hot press. You really can't see a texture to it. It's just smooth, really nice. If you're going to be drawing on your paper or doing like fairies or something that has specific detail, then this real fine paper is going to be better. This one is 140 pounds. I like working on it. It's also 140 pounds, but you'll see that this is cold press paper. You can see that there's a little bit of texture to it, maybe. It's not enough to destroy any of your fine lines. I like working on this one as well. If you're just starting out in watercolor, then it comes in loose sheets, and it has a texture to it. The Watercolor Hobby Lobby brand has a texture to it also that I find somewhat distracting whenever I'm painting. But if you're just beginning, having something inexpensive like the little watercolor pads, or if you have a child that is just getting into watercolor. So we'll go into palettes. You'll need something to put your paint on and mix. Mine typically turn out looking like this. I like the little plastic ones because they're lightweight. I can travel with them. I can wash them. Sometimes they do stain, so that's one of the downfalls. They come in metal and porcelain also. But here's another version. They have nice deep wells so you can mix up larger colors. I let them dry and I can reuse the watercolor in them. You don't have to wipe them out every time just because you didn't use all that color. So that's something to keep in mind. I keep a cup on my desk. This is the one that I favorite right now for having paint in it, or I have water in it. There's a lot of artists that like 2 cups, and they will have one for loading water into their paint so that it stays cleaner, and they have a second cup for rinsing out their paintbrushes. So if you want a 2-cup system, go for it. Otherwise, 1 cup, more than enough. I'm a 1-cup person. I use 1 cup. Having paper towels or something to absorb excess water nearby while painting, or for drips, spills, especially if you have a younger person painting, having things, it's wet, it does drip sometimes, especially off of your paintbrush. I don't typically use paper towels, but you can fold them into quarters and have them, you dab off extra water. I typically use rags because I can wash them in the washing machine, and I have just a box of rags that I pull one from and then wash afterwards. And I also really like having baby wipes next to my setup, because I'll wipe down all my little splatter after I've finished working. So not needed. Having something to wipe spills and excess water off of your canvas is very convenient. But if you want to just stick with paper towels, that's fine. If you want to go somewhat less traditional with baby wipes and rags, then that works too. Completely up to you. Painter's tape is wonderful for taping down your paper. They come in a large amount of variety. They have some specific just for watercolor. I typically use regular painter's tape that I find at Lowe's that I can buy a lot cheaper. I tape most of my paintings. I like it directly onto my desk, but a lot of people put it on a flat surface like thin plywood or masonite, something smooth that they can sit flat or tilt. Another thing that might speed up the process is having a blow dryer. This is my craft room blow dryer. I'm really bad about using it. I tend to just let things dry naturally. But if you're really impatient, having a blow dryer will help speed up the process. We'll go into pencils. I typically just use regular mechanical pencils to lay down any drawing that I want and then erase it away with a white. These are the two erasers that I typically have out whenever I am painting. This is just a normal white eraser, and this is a kneaded eraser. So if you're not in the art world, you probably haven't seen one of these. They are wonderful, and I would pick this one over this one, purely for this one is somewhat self-cleaning. So if you erase away, you can manipulate it and clean it and then roll it back into a ball. And if you need small areas, then you can roll it, get really small detail rubbed out. And if you just want to lighten your drawing, you can mash it against the drawing and lift up, and it'll just lighten what's already there. So instead of erasing it completely, you can just lighten your pencil work. So a lot of illustrations will have pen work done into them. I like these little micron pens. They go a long way, and they typically don't yellow whenever put into the sunlight. This is one of those things that you're going to want to test out before you start drawing onto your watercolor, because some of them will bleed out when water touches them. Test what ink you use, that way you don't ruin a painting. You can also use India ink, which is a really dark ink. It's used in calligraphy a lot. It comes with this neat little dropper you can put into one of your little ink wells. You can just drip it right onto your painting. I'm going to go into less traditional watercolor materials. If you're just starting out, you probably won't need what I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to cover them anyway, just because they're things that I use. And if you're wanting to experiment more, then they're things that you should be aware of that are out there. So one of them is masking fluid. I use it a lot in my pieces. I love having little resist areas. So you lay it down. It's a solidifying fluid that you can mark off areas that you don't want paint to get to, just like the painter's tape on the edge of your paper. And they have these little resist pins. I'm not super fond of this. I think this brand is really thick and slightly frustrating to use. I am a fan of this pin that you push down to get started, and once it's coming out, then you draw whatever you want onto, or wherever you want. If you want to outline everything so that it has a white outline, you can just rub this away whenever you're done with it, or you can get one of these little glue running erasers like this. This one's mine. I'm very fond of having one of these little remover things so that I'm not constantly rubbing on my paper. And you can go back once you've painted, and you can use gel pens for little bright dots of white. They're really good for going over. They're opaque. Gouache is similar to watercolor. It's water activated. It comes in the little tubes. You can use those to restore your highlights. You can paint them over the top or with watercolors. It's not going to hurt anything. Here it is. I found it. This is a little container of gouache white. You can also use colored pencils. I love using I like using Prismacolors over the top of my, I have a drawer of them. Like I said, this is my studio. I have a drawer of Prismacolors that I draw over the top of my watercolors with, but you're getting more into mixed media versus just traditional. These are extra things that you can add to if you already have art supplies, if you're not just starting in. Having a compass on hand to do circles. I like adding chalk pastels also. I have a little bucket of them that I keep out. They also make a thing called watercolor pencils, which are color pencil form, and you draw onto your paper with the watercolor, and once you have it where you need those colors, then you can add water and it liquefies them and kind of makes them bleed out. Having a watercolor sketchbook isn't a bad idea. It's nice to have an experimental sheet while you're painting so that you can test out colors, and then everything else is just additional things that you probably have at home, and I'm going to throw in here just as probably too much information. So having a ruler, good idea, especially if you want symmetrical edges on your paper, or if you want something to be right in the middle. If you want to measure, I have a plastic one. I like being able to see through so that I know what's there. Also, having a Exacto knife. I have one because that's how I sharpen all of my colors. Having one of these, you can scrape up the paper and reclaim some of your highlight. So odd little textures. You can do blot leaves or something. These can be torn to smaller sizes that are more convenient, but they make really interesting leaf patterns in watercolor. Actually in acrylic also, they're fun to work with. Having little cotton balls will create really soft shapes in clouds. That's something to have fun with and experiment, especially if you're working with little ones. They really like things they've seen before in the house used for painting. It's like, wow, this is, and they're soft, so that helps. I like using the size sponge for doing pattern or stencils. If I put a stencil down, then using something that's not going to be super wet is more convenient. Dish soap sponges for the kitchen, they make really neat patterns. Old toothbrushes are really great. I love flicking little water droplets on my paintings. Having little Q-tips to take off extra paint. There are things that you have around the house already that are just fun to experiment. This is another one. I use this one for my wax resist because Whenever it gets really gross and gummed up, I just chop it off a little bit more. It's an old brush. This one's actually for stenciling. That's why I keep my old brushes. This is a chip brush. They're really, really inexpensive, but they make great texture, just dragging up lines. So grass or super fun. Anyway, and then there's, if you want drops, you can get these at Hobby Lobby also, or craft store. So none of these that I've mentioned at the very end are needed for beginner watercolor. All you really need is a good general basic range of color, a small selection of brushes, 4 to 6 brushes, watercolor paper, a cup of water, and something to absorb the extra water. So those few things are all you really need to get started in watercolor. Anyway, if you like the video, please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, please put them into the comments and I'll see if I can get to them. And if you have any videos or questions that you would like me to show you, then put those in the comments also, and I'll see about making other videos that maybe answer some of your questions. So I know this was quite a in-depth covering of watercolor materials. The next one's going to be over how to use these to make things. So have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.